October. And it is a pleasure for me to be here today. I'm very happy. I'm very happy to see you all here on site and online as well, because global partnerships, responsible engagement, global engagement is in the core of UNIPID activities for many, many years. And it's also very close to my heart. So I'm very happy to be here today and welcome you all to this panel and also closing the seminar of DEVELOP2 conference. Before we dive into the panel, a few housekeeping considerations. We have 2 Q&A sessions in the middle of the discussion and right towards the end, and I'll invite all participants, both online and on site, to participate as much as you can, because the themes and the questions that we're going to discuss here today are not exclusive to the panelists here today, are not exclusive to myself, but I think there are themes and questions that should be discussed by everyone, and we should normalize and mainstream these discussions here in Finland. So I invite you all to participate, raise questions, comments in the chat box as well. We have our colleagues from the Research Council of Finland following the chat box, so please do make this panel as interactive as possible. So a bit about the rationale behind this panel is why are we talking about where are we going with good research practice and responsible partnerships? And it's a bit also echoing what our keynote was saying this morning, like how do we move from a buzzword that is currently buzzing here in Finland to action? And this panel is informed by Finland's recent developments and growing efforts to improve global partnerships, but with a focus on ethical engagement. And I would like to raise a few examples, few milestones that I think we should put into consideration while we're talking about a momentum that I will briefly talk in soon, but also a buzzword. And for example, I would like to raise the developing national guidelines on responsible research with the Sami community that hopefully will be launched this year as well, which is a collaborative effort between Finnish higher education institutions and institutions from the Sami community. And to a certain extent, I know that the Finnish National Board on Research Integrity is also involved. We have our colleagues from Opetushallitus, Finnish National Agency for Education, also providing different spacings, hosting meetings, and with a Global South focus, also creating their own guidelines. Of course, I'm going to mention as well the ethical guidelines for academic partnerships with the Global South that UNIPID in collaboration with TENK developed and we launched last year, which is a self-reflective document that invites people to reflect on values, principles, standards, and practices, as well as further recommending more literature on these, on how to engage with Global South and for our higher education community. And last but not least, and why we're here today, is because the DEVELOP2 program is more explicit in the need on international collaboration, putting more emphasis on creating collaboration in equal terms. So these are just examples, and I'm sure that when you raise these conversations, you can find more concrete, smaller scale, micro, local initiatives when you have these discussions. And that's why I'm talking about momentum, and also that it's transforming this discourse into a buzzword, research partnerships, equitable partnerships. It's slowly growing in the conversation here in Finland, but also equally growing is also what are we doing next? How can we transcend from discourse to practice? And we already been facing also the conversations in UNIPID with our colleagues, with our stakeholders, is how do we materialize these practices? There's no clear straight line on how to do it. There's no documentation on practices. And to a certain extent, we believe it's because there's a lack of conversation about this, a lack of evidence, what our keynote was saying, and also a lack of standard practices. So this is why we're here today, and I'm delighted to present in a few minutes the panelists that are invited here today for the discussion, because researchers are key players. They're not the only ones that could talk about responsible partnerships, and they're not the only ones responsible here. And I think it's also, we need to recognize that there's different individuals and different institutions who have a role and have a responsibility for systemic change, for transcending from discourse to action. But researchers indeed have the potential to offer concrete examples with their own case studies, with their own research projects. And that's why we're sitting here today, or standing here today, with researchers funded by the DEVELOP2 program. So I'll be introducing one by one the panelists here today. It's a hybrid panel today. We have 2 online and on-site, and 2 online and 3 on-site. And I will start with Dr. Sunil Prasad Lohani, that you can see here online. Sunil is an associate professor at Kathmandu's University Department of Mechanical Engineering. He's led the Renewable and Sustainable Energy Laboratory and has completed several national and international collaborative projects. His research interest focuses on renewable energy, energy systems, energy transition, and climate change mitigation. He has published and presented over 60 articles and serves as a reviewer for several journals. Sunil is a partner in the project, in the DEVELOP2 project called Technological and Socioeconomic Solutions to Reduce Indoor Air Pollution in Nepal. Welcome, Sunil. Dr. Maria Ernstrom Fuentes, she's also online, and Maria is an associate professor of Hanken School of Economics and holds a docenture on global development studies at the University of Helsinki. Her research focuses on the social, political, and environmental implications of corporate social responsibility in economies of resource extraction in the Global South. She also studies how communities restore ecologically damaged landscapes and meanings of sustainability in local food networks. Currently, she leads the DEVELOP2 project, Trees for Development, which focuses on processes of ecological restoration through tree plantations in the Global South. Welcome, Maria. Dr. Eero Kajantie. Eero is a researcher in life course health who divides its time between the University of Oulu, the Finnish Institute of Health and Welfare, and the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. He studies the health of preterm children and adults in high and low resource settings using the developmental origins of health and disease framework. The research combines in-depth studies of mechanisms underlying early life programming of lifelong health in clinical and population cohorts with lifelong health studies in whole population registers. Eero leads the project Small Vulnerable Newborns and the Transgenerational Cycle of Health and Development. Welcome, Eero. Dr. Laura Stark. Laura is a professor of ethnology of the University of Jyväskylä. Research interests include gender, sexuality, and urban poverty in Africa. She has led 5 externally funded multi-research projects, and recent edited volumes included Power and Informality in Urban Africa and Gendered Power and Mobility Technology Intersections in the Global South. Laura leads the project, as you heard just recently, LGBTQI+ and the street-level bureaucrats, assessing motives, violence, and possibilities for collective advocacy. Welcome, Laura. And we have Dr. Anu Valtonen. Anu works part-time as an associate professor at the Department of Ecology and Environmental Science at Umeå University, Sweden, and part-time as researcher at the University of Eastern Finland in Joensuu. She's an ecologist, especially interested in the effects of environmental changes on diversity. She's leading the project towards sustainable harvesting of Africa edible bush crickets for enhancing food security and rural livelihoods in East Africa. Welcome, Anu. So definitely very interesting, very diverse backgrounds, which might make this panel very enriching as well to sort of tap into those perceptions and experience of partnership building. We will concentrate on 4 overarching ideas: how to design mutual accountability, how to use principles and guidelines in a practical way, how to address incentives and disincentives for change, and hopefully ending in a very good tone, very progressive tone, and a call for action. But let's start off with an easy question. Tell us a bit about your research, who are your partners, and how are you ensuring equitability in your research partnerships? Sunil, if you would like to start.
Okay, Thank you, Brito. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where we are. Am I audible?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So it's a real pleasure and honor to be here this afternoon, this evening with you all regarding the project that I'm partnering with the Finland University, that technological and socio-economic solution to reduce indoor air pollution in Nepal. In short, we call it Smoke-Free Home Nepal. And the overarching objective is to find out the most effective techno-economic and socially acceptable measures to reduce residential biomass combustion emissions from Nepalese rural house and actually especially lower the exposure of indoor air pollutants to women and children who are mostly in kitchen in Nepalese context or maybe in several other contexts. And the partner is University of Eastern Finland. Actually, University of Eastern Finland is leading lead coordinator, and Kathmandu University and Tribhuvan University are the partners for this project. So that's all about a brief about our project.
Sunil, would you like to answer how are you ensuring equitability in your research partnerships?
Okay, maybe I missed that. Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky issue, you know. In my opinion, transparency, accountability are some of the important aspects, whereas open communication between all partners just to ensure equitability. However, the challenges of ensuring equitability in research partnership basically representing from perhaps from LDC, I'm not actually in a position to generalize, but whatever I have seen in my context, in Nepalese context, and some of the neighboring context. So from that side, often it stems from a systemic existing problems, you know, and that starts with the institutional leadership selection process, for example. Most of the time it's controversial and not transparent, you know, in those institutions. And the consequence of that, you know, it's mostly reflected as the competence deficit and ethical issues at the leadership level. That obviously worsen the work environment and often the research priority of the institution, driven by illogical and shallow foundation of self-interest of most of the time those leadership and their close allies. So that is on one side, which is already in a systemic problems, you know, existing problems. On the other hand, we from developing or third world countries most often serve as a partner, whereas EU institutions lead the project most often. In these circumstances, you can see it is very hard to ensure equitability in research partnership. Rather depends on the individual who led the project from EU side, you know. If that individual, that institution and that professor embrace the idea of ensuring equitability in partnership, obviously things will be easy. There won't be much issue. Otherwise, our position, let's say from partner, from third world countries, position is not very strong to raise most of the time, even for unjust issues. Because as I said, there is already one systemic existing problems that is hindering those who are passionate in research and willing to collaborate. He himself is struggling within the institution most of the cases. And obviously there are not much funding available in those countries. National fundings are not available. So they are not very strong position to negotiate, for the equitable partnership or something like that. So my experience says it entirely depends at the moment. It entirely depends on the individual institution and professor who are partnering from EU, how they embrace all these concepts, philosophies. That's how things will move on. My opinion is something like this. Thank you, Brito.
Thank you, Sunil. And indeed, he's raising already a few challenges being a partner of a project being funded not by his home institution, but an institution located here in Finland. Maria, would you like to go forward? Who are your partners and how are you ensuring equitability in your research partnerships?
Thank you. So I guess I don't need to repeat what I was presenting early in the morning when I presented our project on ecological restoration and tree planting through tree planting. So that is the topic of our project, and our partners are mainly working in the work packages that are looking at the cases and the grassroots action, so to say. So we have project partners. I will mention how now here from my notes. So we are working in Ethiopia with Bikila Barkine at Addis Ababa University. He is actually in plant ecology researcher. So we are social scientists, many of us, and now we're also working then with professors in biology. We have then also Professor Sergio Sauer at University of Brasilia, who we have had a long-term collaboration with, mainly through Markus Kröger's work on the political science of land change and tree planting in Brazil. In Madagascar, we are working with Bruno Ramanurgi from University of Antananarivo, and this goes through Marketta Vuola's network of contacts, and she has worked with him before. And then we have in Mozambique, we have Mariam Abbas, that is from Observatorio do Meio Rural, and this goes through our existing networks that we have established through research exchange over the year throh Ossi Ollinaho and Markus Kröger. So most of our work is based on previous research with collaborative partners, or exchange at least of ideas from previous years that came before we started to elaborate this research project. But we're also building then on new networks, so to say, that goes beyond what is the social sciences. And I see that that is like not a topic that was at all touched upon today, is that we're a multidisciplinary team, and we're expected from each of our institutions to publish in different journals. And so already here we're coming into like the challenges, and I think that is where we need to work, like in this initial stage actually, is to look in order to create collaborative partnerships that are equitable and useful for all. I think it's really important to think through these expectations that we have from our different institutions on the one hand, and then also the ambitions of our different partners. So already that is a challenge, but I think that is also where the most meaningful work can be done. I don't know if I should continue here, but just in terms of equitable partnership, it's very much also in the hands of the workpack leaders that have long-term experience in these fields. I forgot to mention that we also have Linda Annala that is living in Ethiopia and have established these networks there. So it is through our workback leaders that we are trying to build trustful relationships in each country.
Thank you, Maria, and I like that you're already connecting with other themes of this panel, but for the sake of time, we will go with the panelists here on site. What about you, Laura? Who are your partners and how are you ensuring in practice equitability?
Thank you. So hopefully my microphone is working. Yeah. So basically, the way that I did this, because this was I didn't have partners, I didn't have my co-researchers in mind. So we had an open call. And the people who are currently in the hiring process, one has studied law and the other has studied public health. So the interdisciplinary aspects will definitely come up. We were going to have to learn from each other, which is what makes this rich. Each person will have a lot to give to the project. And the project was designed from the beginning that we would do everything together. So we go together to each country. On a given day, we might be interviewing the same people or different people, but in any case, in the evenings, after the interviewing, in the afternoons, evenings, we gather together and we're going to be talking about the data that we've collected, the interviews, interview responses, and analyzing together. And my idea was that we do it all together and that we share, all data is shared. That was made clear when people applied for the job in the interviews, that we said, are you okay with that? That all the data that that each of the three of us collects is going to be then accessible to all. So that I wanted really everything to be equitable from the beginning. And then we have also the other partners in Uganda whom we are keeping in touch with this, even though they're not, salaried researchers. And we're keeping in touch with them. And also we're applying for the ethics permits. And so all of those forms I just last week sent to the persons who will be hired, asking for their comments, asking especially because we were giving the starting interview questions, the initial, I don't know, there's probably a list of 30 interview questions of things that we would ask from different groups of people, but I asked them for comments on that, and they're giving their comments on that, reading. So trying to, I think at this stage of the project, before we've collected our data, what's really important is to keep in communication. And what's really important is that if one person feels like something's not working for them or they disagree, that they're very open about that, because that's how I learn. And so it's just that open communication, honesty, and saying clearly when they don't agree with something. And then that's what helps me try to see it from their point of view, because I can't always know what challenges they're facing. So, and I'm trying to encourage that. So that's how it's beginning.
Thank you, Laura. What about you, Anu?
Is my mic working? Yes. So I have been lucky enough to sort of inherit my research partnerships. I worked for a long time for many years in Heikki Roinen's research group at the University of Eastern Finland. So we have had multiple projects in Uganda. The first projects were biodiversity research projects because we are entomologists. But biodiversity is kind of a difficult concept. What is it? But then we realized that these edible insects are something which really interests there. So this is extremely a theme which came from our Ugandan collaborators. So my collaborators in Uganda are Jeffrey Malinga at Gulu University and Philip Nyeko from Makerere University. We have a really long, like a decade-long working collaboration together. So we have sort of merged together. We consider each other as partners of the same research group. So we plan applications together and we write them together. So we sort of plan these projects from the start on together. They have their strengths and I have maybe my strengths, and then we just throw ideas, and then usually it's done in complete panic in the end of the deadline, but then we just delete the worst ideas and keep the best ideas, and then sometimes it works. So that's like the process. Great. And yeah, equitability comes from this long-term working together and having this trust in our case.
Thank you, Anu. I think it sounds like very spontaneous as well, like trial and error on partnership building. What about you, Ed?
Yes, thank you. So I haven't had been lucky to join in these kind of two north-south collaborations with long traditions. tradition. So between Malawian collaborators at Kamuzu University of Health Sciences, which is the medical university of Malawi, and who has been collaborating with actually Tampere University, Professor Per Asson, Ulla Asson, and their global and maternal child health group, and kind of have established a culture of collaboration, which has been kind of easy to join, and the same applies to our work in Bangladesh, where the Bangladesh collaborators at the International Society for Diarrheal Disease Research, which is a kind of an international organization formally, and despite its name, it has kind of become it is a major also maternal child health and non-communicable disease kind of a public health institution. Has in this project has long traditions with Uppsala University, and again it's been kind of easy to join to an existing framework. In my other research life, I have engaged in a number of different collaborations, ranging from kind of a very informal ones, you kind of become research friends with some people who you are interested in the same topics, and perhaps start a small-scale project and have some funding, have some more funding, pretty much small scale, or then this type of, for example, EU-funded projects where you have a clear timeline and structures and deliverables, and somehow these types of north-south collaborations have a lot also in similar, and as has been alluded to by many speakers today, so the creation of trust is kind of a vital and utmost, and which requires finding out why we do this research, what is everyone's motivation, what is important for everyone in different perspectives, in kind of in research perspective, in personal life, perhaps career perspectives, and other types of kind of what I want to achieve in society, and so on, and so it's important to know, but then one thing also is to be very sensitive to that if someone is unhappy, so to try to find the weak signs of unhappiness and kind of act fast on them. It's not always easy, and you need time for, but this all kind of takes time, and also personally it's been for me a kind of a development journey, and myself I kind of self-identify as an introvert perhaps, and I have to kind of deliberately come outside my comfort zone, and that would also be my advice to kind of younger researchers, that you may need to come out of your comfort zone, but then again, there are established kind of ways to create trust, create collaboration. There is some research done on the topic, and kind of there is a kind of a cookbook how you should do, and of course you also have to then implement that in your way. So that's kind of basically what I have to say.
Thank you, Eero. And I think you're naturally leading to the second theme of this panel, which is about how to use principles and guidelines. And you've touched about there's already existing literature. There's many guidelines that also our keynote highlighted. And for example, in your experience, especially like with the amount of guidelines, with the amount of expectations, and also when you're working in international collaborations, research partnerships, research integrity, open science, research communication, and out on top of that, societal impact and partnership building. So it's a lot already on your back on top of the deliverables and outputs that you want to deliver through your projects. So how do you navigate with this? Like, are guidelines useful for you? What resonates to you? But what also is challenging for you with these amount of guidelines? Anybody would like to start? Those online, maybe? Maria or Sunil?
Well, I can start here. I actually think that they are very useful in the way, as long as they are broad enough and not too detailed. And I find the 10 guidelines quite broad in the sense that it makes us think about things and also structure our own thoughts about what is really important to look into and to think through. Because I think that the most important part when we're building these global north, global south relationships, trustful relationships, well, the most important is, of course, to approach it in a way that you understand your position of privilege coming from the global north. And that came out quite clearly in the keynote in the morning. But really, the second part is acknowledge that you don't know that much about how that you start from a position of not knowing, but that position of not knowing shouldn't be that broad. So these guidelines are really helping in navigating this, because I think if you're I am a researcher that did my PhD in Latin America and had to kind of navigate these things on my own, as I was based at a business school mostly. I did have contacts at Global Development Studies, but we were not really thinking about these things that much. So I think that having these guidelines is kind of setting a little bit the agenda, helping us, pushing us towards bringing it into our different circles. And to understand also that once we do start engaging with other researchers from Global South institutions, that there are issues that are not applied in our own communities, but that we have to take seriously.
Thank you, Maria. What about you, Anna?
Yeah, I also think that they were very useful, because when I have this long sort of experience in these collaborations, I have been sort of thinking these, not actively thinking, but sort of somehow these are familiar to me, and I've been wondering things, but I've never been actually verbalizing things. I've never talked this out. So now that it's possible to read them, it's actually more concrete, leads to more thinking and then more action in projects. Like now we can actually bring up these themes when there is something like on the paper. Yeah.
Yes, Laura.
Yeah, I totally agree with Anu. I think that, for example, the UNEP, the new ethical guidelines for partnerships with the Global South, it gives labels, good labels, to things that we're already doing. But for myself, I find the labels very useful, because now there's these guidelines with these words like ethics of care and things like this, that I can now go to my administration in the university and say, look, I have to do my project this way because there's these guidelines. And before, there was no way to really explain to the administration. They're saying, well, why are you spending their budget money on X, And I had to explain, and it's hard for them to imagine what's going on in the Global South. So this is really, really useful, I find. Thanks.
Great, Laura. What about you, Eero? What do you think?
Yes, yeah, I think it's also very good to have this type of, should I say, checklist. It's probably not a proper word, but you get the idea that kind of, in particular, if you are kind of new in the field, so it's good to have a framework of what kind of I should take into account, and also in terms of guidelines, it can be very helpful documentation, as all guidelines are kind of children of their time, and guidelines what we would write or would be written after 10 years would likely be somewhat different. So it's also kind of gives a healthy time perspective. If you, for example, have guidelines from different periods, then again, some guidelines may tend to focus or kind of encourage a lot of documentation, and that's something which I'm not always. I would like to kind of apply those types of recommendations a little bit, also depending on the resources that are available, because these types of documentation may actually take up, as you mentioned, there are many guidelines we should follow, may also take up quite a substantial part of the resources available, and that's something I think we should be careful with.
Yeah, it's definitely true. Like we've been highlighting positives, but also challenging if resources not allocated for documentation of these practices, for example. But what about Sunil? You have a very unique position because you're a partner. And these guidelines are written, for example, the ethical guidelines for responsible academic partnerships are written for the Finnish higher education community, although we invite their partners to be fully aware of those. But what do you think about these guidelines or this ecosystem or plethora of guidelines? And do they resonate to you or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think guidelines are in every case, guidelines gives you one sort of convergence for the things that you have to do. So it will certainly be helpful. But in our context, because we are not from European context, so those guidelines basically focused on Finnish perspective. And from our perspective, we are not much concerned with those guidelines, in fact. But the guiding principle or the guiding text for us are sort of agreement between leading institution and partner institution. So some of the content of your guidelines are already in our agreement. So we already talk about research integrity, open communication, open lots of things in our agreement. So some of the text will be in our agreement. So we basically have to.
Okay, I think the connection is sort of dropping. But while we get Sunil back,
align the guidelines that have been.
Yes, so we're having troubles with connection, Sunil. But do you want to finish, Sunil? Yeah. Is your connection better?
Yeah, okay then, I'll start. I'm sorry for the connection. It's also another problem in our context, just to acknowledge the problem. And then, for example, my experience, as I said earlier, there is whatever you have written in the text, that does not have much value unless the person embrace those ideas. It's easy to saying than done. So that is kind of things we all know. So guidelines certainly helpful, but my experience working with various partners from developed countries all across the Europe, most of the countries in Europe and other developing countries, things should trickle down from the individual, and the communication, trust, respect, transparency, honesty, responsiveness, all these things are key, and that always held with the leader of the project or the work packages. So that's what I believe, or I experience in my career working with different partners. Okay, over to Brito.
Thank you, Sunil. So definitely we're hiding a lot of positives on the amount of guidelines. So I sense that you are experienced navigating with the amount of expectations from these guidelines and also expectations from your partners. Yes, Anu.
To add one thing which came up just a few weeks ago. So I think when we have these guidelines and when we talk about this, it also puts pressure to, let's say, journals. So what I noticed a couple of weeks ago when we submitted a manuscript to Journal of Animal Ecology, which was rejected, but still they had in the submission system, they already had a fair research statement box where we had to, it says, Please briefly summarize the actions you took to provide opportunities for intellectual contribution from researchers, practitioners, or local ethnic groups from the country or region where the study was undertaken. This is new. I have never seen anything like this. So now when these are starting to come, so when you submit a paper, you already have to state there what was actually done, and I think that puts pressure. So then it starts to trickle down to different, probably in the future, these guidelines, and we are also already seeing it.
Thank you so much, Anu, to raising that, because that's very interesting as well, like slowly, like as also our keynote was highlighting, like for the past 5 years, that this is becoming also not completely central, but it's becoming something of a conversation that also journals in this case, and maybe funding agencies as well, could also acknowledge already in the application phase on a question about partnership building. Right now we can take the first Q&A session. So are there any questions here right now on site or online? Or any comments or experiences that you would like to share as well?
Hi, thank you all for your input and for sharing your thoughts on how to achieving equitability and how you try in your teams, in your collaborations to achieve equitability. My question to no one in specific is, do you really believe that it's possible, truly possible to achieve equitability when the money sits most of the time in the north? When the management comes from the north? It's been mentioned that, yes, Joka goes down to the PI, to the people involved, but is it truly possible? So, yeah.
Who would like to answer? Yeah.
Eero can go first.
Short answer, no. But kind of this is something that kind of we can, as researchers, we can always make efforts to work towards. I mean, we have many goals in life which are impossible to research, but impossible to reach. But still we strive after these goals and but I agree that kind of inequality in resources. So I don't see a way to kind of nullify that, but we can do our best to reduce as much as possible.
Thank you, Eero. Yes, Laura.
Yeah, just shortly, I agree. The answer is no. And I'm going to say just a couple of things that are related to this is that one of the things too that we need to keep in mind is that the research funding agendas are set by large think tanks. And yes, it's the researchers have applied, but often the themes are delimited and it's going according to that. So there's that power center also to keep in mind. And the other thing that really has to do with your question is that we need to really think about who has the right to the gaze, to look at another culture. And because researchers in the North have the money, they're going to other places and looking at other cultures, other societies, other ecological systems, and so forth. Whereas the researchers from the Global South are not really able to come here and study Finnish society, in the same way. So who has the access and who has the right to look at the other and to look at the others, the other society or the other culture? And I think that's just those kind of power centers are just really important to keep in mind. And it really revolves around money because our entire world now is not just a capitalist economy, it's a capitalist society, and money is at the center of everything. So yes, but thank you for bringing up the very good question.
Would anybody else like to respond?
Yes, I can respond also. I would also say no, as long as the money comes from here. But if we as researchers doing collaborative research together with researchers from the Global South are aware of this, then at least I think that our role can be to serve as a platform to kind of channel some of that money to the Global South in a meaningful way. And not only in that way, the mentioning of us being able to go and do the research in the Global South and kind of go wherever we want, and then there is not that mutual relation from the other way around. I do think that we can build that. We can provide platforms, like, for example, in our work package from Ethiopia, we have budgeted in so that the person that is a PhD student that is working from there on our project will also be able to come to Finland and be here for a while and doing, well, open to do research here as well based on what is going on here, but at least to get to know other researchers than only us. And so, but this is very challenging to get this kind of funding into these projects, because it does eat up a lot of the funding budget when you are supposed to do the research in that context. So there is also a call towards the funders to think through how those kind of systems could better be developed, or kind of some parallel system where we could like develop those issues, because it does take away from what the proposal was. But we find it that it's very important to also provide a platform to build career and to be able to do research elsewhere.
Thank you, Maria. Is there any other questions here? Yes.
Okay. Oh, it's working now. I don't mean to be controversial, but I think equitability is relative. This is what I think. And I think that the reason it currently feels like it's out of reach is because research and how research is funded currently centers resource allocation. So the money is what guides the research, if you know what I mean. But let's assume for 1 minute that as the as research, people in the research system, so these are policymakers, funders, universities, and academics themselves, disentangled themselves from the economics. Equitability is possible because it comes down to then value. If you allocate value to your Global South partner as beyond money, you raise their value and contribution to your work. So when they come to work with you, you're coming on an equal footing, because you're not using your financial power to define and determine the research agenda. You're not using your financial power to impose your processes, and you're not using your financial power anymore to define the knowledge production processes. So are we maybe asking the wrong question, whether equitability is achievable, but maybe we should be asking whether there is really a need to align research and the essence of research to economic achievement. And I know I'm asking a difficult question, especially now when education is a commodity. Like, just look what's happened to Finland in the last couple of years. There was a time where Finnish universities would never have thought about selling education to anyone because it was a basic right. And now we are at a point where Finnish universities that before did learning and teaching from an intrinsic place are having to do it extrinsically. So maybe the question here should be about the relationship between economics and the neutrality of research.
Thank you, Eva, and very interesting comment, also making this panel very interesting as well. No, and yes, relative and equitability, the focus on money. Money means power, but it could also be relative. And what kind of questions are we asking here? But what if there's no other questions? What about online? Is there any other questions online? Were there other questions?
There was one more question. The lady behind Eva, yeah.
Yeah, this is a bit on another topic, but I wanted to ask you, all of you, how you see the role of training new doctors in issues like this, and even earlier. And I'm asking particularly this from personal interest. Since I come from Tampere Peace Research Institute, we have master's program in peace and conflict research and also doctorate training. And many of our MA students would like to do field work and do particularly ethnographic field work. That's what in their mind, and we have kind of tried to raise all these issues what we have discussed here today and integrate that into our master's program. But I would like to hear your views, because you come from different disciplines and might have completely quite a different perspective. So the role of training in these issues.
Who would like to take? Oh, we dropped Sunil, unfortunately. But who would like to answer to this question? Training on partnership building. Yes.
I can answer really briefly that I've been to a similar, in Uppsala there was a similar discussion like this where someone brought up that you really need to dare to bring students into the field, and usually it's more participatory if you do that. And I think that's a wonderful idea. I'm not doing that in my project simply because I don't have the budget for it. And I didn't, and I should have thought of it from the beginning. So it's a really good question, because I think that training is very important, and it's something that I should have planned from the beginning as part of the research framework. So thank you for bringing it up.
Anyone else who would like to answer?
Yeah, we have had, in our research group, we have had master students and PhD students doing fieldwork in Uganda, but it's getting increasingly difficult because of the fees, because of the bureaucracy. And also, yes, so it's, I think it's getting increasingly difficult, although that would be the most valuable thing almost that could, come to train new people and to see the situation in the field. But I think it's difficult, at least to Africa.
Okay. Thank you, Anu. Maria, you were going to say something?
I just quickly that we also have master students that are interested in going to do field research, and yes, I do see that we need to have some proper training in place on these topics, but maybe it is related to these researcher collaborations as well. But the complexity of going and meeting other cultures that you may not have been come into contact with before is a topic that deserves a lot of attention. So I've done research in Mapuche communities in Chile, and I know that there many researchers, also Chilean researchers, are not allowed in anymore. It's called intellectual extractivism, and that there is not enough commitment towards the communities that are in struggle for life and death situation. And so it's even another level dimension to this issue that I think deserves training. I just wanted to also comment on the previous comment about value-based. Well, I think that when you have long-term relations that you build on trust, and you are co-working and publishing, and you're writing your papers together, that is from where those common values, and you are also. I don't see that the research partnerships that have been built for a long time could remain for a long time if it wasn't because you give value to each other. So that was just like a comment on that, but the economic part is problematic. That was the first question. So that just a comment, but I definitely need more training, doctoral students and master's students, if they are planning to go out to do field research.
Thank you, Maria. And just as a quick comment, but UNIPID did pilot a training 2 years ago offered to Finnish higher education institutions. It was actually funded by the Global Networks, funded by the Ministry of Education. And I think, yes, indeed, there's like a crave for more training, but because of how we work, for example, who we targeted and how we communicated, maybe reaching the early stage career researchers would be ideal, for example, before going to field work as well. But okay, let's go back on track to this panel and let's transition to the third theme, which is addressing incentives and disincentives for change. And I would like you to tap into your experiences, very practical experiences, like what barriers have you faced to bring forward responsible partnerships? You already mentioned a couple, but what other barriers have you faced, and what sort of expectations do you have from your partners or from your funders and collaborators to sort of navigate through these barriers? Who would like to start? Eero, maybe?
Yeah, perhaps I just mention one barrier which I've been thinking about, and is kind of the inequality in the time resource and time resource in South-North collaborations. I mean, of course, time is a scarce resource everywhere, but perhaps in projects I have been involved with, the kind of heavy burden on teaching, administration and so on of the southern partners has sometimes been a kind of just a practical obstacle that many researchers are so overburdened with duties and such that research time simply too little time to conduct even the minimal task for some periods, and then of course there might be better periods in between. But I would like to also to hear what is the others' experience, and what would be kind of ways to counteract.
Yes.
Yeah, we talked already about the financial sort of inequality, that when we sort of it's so difficult to get funding from Africa, but we have also experienced that this they can face really heavy bureaucracy, for example, which is difficult to understand from here. But for example, our Ugandan collaborators, they cannot do research in their own national parks because of the fees to work in national parks are so high that it's just, even though they have reduced rates much lower than foreign researchers, but still they are so high that they just can't do it. And especially long-term research would be the most valuable in biology and ecology special, that requires many months, and these are some things that we take it for granted here, that but for them it can be this kind of, even with the costs are just too high. So it's difficult, as a barrier, it makes us really in an equal position, because for them doing even like basic research in their own country can be like financially.
And have you found ways to sort of
this is just something that you don't understand unless you go there and discuss with them and work with them, and then you actually start to understand the realism where they live in. And then you can plan the projects taking these kind of details into account, which you wouldn't if you just are here. Or
of course, so some communication.
Yes, exactly. But you need to be there to understand the reality here.
Yeah. What about you, Laura?
Yes, I have 3 barriers, which I'm going to go through really briefly. Okay, so the first one is in terms of, yes, we want to be open, but then there's always the ethical. We need to protect the people we work with if we're doing sensitive things. And so that's just one where you have to really weigh the ethics of protection against the openness and how much can be said or in the end. But okay, so that's the ethical one. Then there's bureaucratic barriers, which I've already with my project encountered here in Finland. So, and actually I have long-term project partners in Ethiopia that I'm not working with right now, but when they've been to my university and they were asked the same question, they also talked about the bureaucratic barriers from my university. And so the bureaucratic barriers are like all of these kinds of rules that are they've come in the last 5 years, and they are really slowing down the process of hiring people from outside the EU. So much so that my colleagues don't do it. They just hire people who are already in the EU, which I chose not to do. But somehow, what I think one thing that would be really useful for these bureaucratic barriers would be that for each university, because I've heard that other universities have maybe even tighter rules than mine or different. So each university has its own rules about how to do this, and to have an info sheet for people who are putting together project proposals, to know in advance all the things that they're going to encounter if they're hiring people from the Global South, working with people from the Global South. So that's something even that the Academy could have, like the info sheets for each university, you know, kind of, I mean, it sounds crazy, but the actual procedures are somewhat, it's difficult to understand why they're in place and who made them and etc. So yes, I think that the info sheets could be really useful. So that's bureaucratic barriers. And also we can tell our partners about these bureaucratic barriers, how long it's going to take to hire them, and what other difficulties they might encounter in, for example, coming to Jyväskylä, because I really wanted to hire people, which meant that they had to come to Finland and be there in Jyväskylä. And the third one has to do with publishing. So one barrier that I was just thinking about it this morning, is that I have a person I've worked very closely with in Tanzania as my interpreter, but she's also sort of a best friend. She's helped, she doesn't have the academic background that I do. She has studied accounting, but she's been this kind of like sounding board for me, and really, I couldn't have done it without her. Well, how do I sort of give her credit in publications? In publications, at least in my field, you can thank someone as a kind of a dedication at the very beginning of your book. You can say that you can have the person as a co-author. Or you can just kind of discuss in the book, say, well, these were the people who worked for me, and this is my interpreter, so and so. But she doesn't fit any of those categories. So we need like a fourth category, at least in my field for academic publishing, something to call someone who, okay, they didn't, develop the project, they didn't think of the theory, they didn't do the actual analysis, and yet they were really important for it, not just an interpreter or an assistant or a guide or something like that. So that's a barrier that I really think that there should be more dialogue about how these people in the countries that we do research, how they are helping us, and how can we give them credit for this? And also, can we use, like in her case, I'm not sure I can use her full name in the publications because it's a sensitive, topic. So I've just been using her first name, but that's not giving her credit. I mean, it's not actually nobody's going to recognize her and give her a job on the basis of helping me, which would be my dream. But anyway, so yes, thank you. Those three things.
So definitely bureaucratic barriers are coming up, time and resource constraints, but also already examples of how to navigate with these barriers. Sunil, what about you? Now we have you back online. What kind of barriers have you faced so far in your collaborations?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things like for a responsible partnership, or there was I was listening some of the questions from the audience that equitable, do we really meet this kind of goals or not? So certainly one issue is like funder or money comes from European partners. So there is some sort of wage disparity on one hand. On the other hand, as I mentioned earlier, there are some systematic problems within the institution in most of the third world countries. So to carry forward the responsible partnership, time constraint, I think someone has already raised the issue. In our context, the recognition or the credit of having good partnership with different organizations, and perhaps bringing lots of projects or even publishing number of very good papers really doesn't matter in most of the third world universities, So when that really doesn't matter, most of the professors are doing that out of passionate, out of their own motivation, self-motivation. Unlike European context, as far as I know, studying from European countries and having different partners, all these things matter there for their career, for their promotion, for getting something. But in LDC's context, most of the time that doesn't matter. There is something else to get to be acknowledged. And why the person is investing lots of time, doing lots, the regular, normal duty of the institution, and all these, carry forwarding partnership, bringing projects, writing papers, is all kind of extra work for him or her. And without any, most of the time, without any acknowledgement and any incentives. So why the person do all these things? So it's very difficult. So you only find very few person who are really passionate. They are trying to carry forward all these things. And even in that context, as I said earlier, sometimes the individual who is really passionate and is struggling to do something in scientific community, to contribute something on scientific community, and trying to bring number of collaborators and all these things, but sometimes the self-interest of changing leadership, they have changing priority, and sometimes that does not align with the individual professor who is thinking something to carry forward this kind of partnership and doing some scientific work, and that sort of barriers and hurdles might come on the way. And internal bureaucracy of the institution, due to all these things, it's sort of a challenge faced by third world countries, researchers, most of the cases which I assume and I experience. Over to Britu.
Thank you, Sunil. And I think you raised a very important aspect, and it's about research excellence in what is considered research excellence in the global north versus the global south, action research versus how we assess research and researchers in the global north, what kind of indicators. Publishing is very important here, but perhaps in some of our global south partners, publishing is not the main priority. That's very important to highlight. What about Maria? What are your challenges? What challenges have you faced so far, or disincentives for change have you faced?
So I find what we already found when we were writing this research proposal and discussing how will we go through with building partnerships, and actually sadly we see that it is an issue, is that although the funders are saying that you need to build this kind of collaborative partnership and that is kind of the basis of everything, then once we get to that bureaucracy and the administration of the things, it's very challenging. So we already in the beginning, while we were writing, we were already discussing, can you, for example, do our universities, the two ones involved, allow for transfer through, for example, through PayPal to individuals in those places? What are the legal issues of that? Can we use PayPal? And if not, then there's a lot of money going to banks. It takes a lot longer. So we had that kind of very practical discussion already in March last year. But then now also then bringing this forward, then what has been very challenging is signing contracts and making it possible to transfer money to individuals, or should it go through universities, and do the universities then, when you finally get to that stage, these very practical issues that are consuming so much time, and unfortunately in the way that it's working, and I don't know if it's on both sides, but it is that on that university administrative level, that if we don't know how to navigate these things, it also eats the trust. And so because it takes such a long time to figure out how to do these things, and I have had actually on my table quite a few of those cases that I've had to navigate through, and I'm a beginner in this field, so it was. I'm very frustrated about this part of the bureaucracy on the administration level, and to understand those things. The other thing I think Laura mentioned, that there are new rules coming in. For example, we now have a rule at my university that the person cannot be away from Finland for more than a month if you're working on a contract in Finland. Well, that is very difficult if you're doing ethnographic research in the global south to have that as a requirement. And then you get into discussions with HR about that. And that is also a limiting factor to bring someone in for a period during the project. So very practical administrative things, I would say, are the most challenging parts.
Thank you, Maria. And I guess we're touching again bureaucracy and administrative challenges. How do we get our administrative processes aligned to partnership building? And that's a question that, yes, Laura, you would like to.
Yes, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Just about that, I want to just give a talk last week. So I was talking with my administration. I said, in my project proposal, I promised to give €4.50 to each interview participant because they're, really super poor, and for their time. But there was really no way to document that because I needed, in reality, I need to take that out in cash from a bank automat and then give them cash. And because none of them have bank accounts and the bank accounts are too expensive, there's a few of them who don't know how to read or write. And I can't actually have them each sign a form saying they received the money because our project is not collecting personal data from them at all. So this was but I came up with a solution. So the way I approached it, I said, this has to be done. It's in the project proposal. It's been funded by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland. It has to be done this way. And I said, here's my idea, that the local government officer would be present when the money is handed out, and the local government officer, it doesn't matter if their name is there because they're not part of the research, then they will sign, I sign as a witness that shows that, it actually, the money went there. And they said, yeah, and if each person could just make an X in a box, so that's how we're going to do it. But I was really happy that I was able to create a practice. They had never faced this before. They had no idea what to do. But I said, look, it's got to be done. Here's my suggestion. And finally they said yes. So I think that when but I realize that not all administrations allow themselves to, allow these new practices to be created. But so.
Definitely, like you've shared a concrete example of how to navigate an administrative challenge, and definitely not many would accept that as a proof, especially with money is involved. But how do we get our administrations or administrative processes aligned to support partnership building? And that's a very difficult question. But due to the sake of time, and also because we're running late on the panel, I would like to end in a positive tone, hopefully, with our panelists and their experiences and also in their processes with the DEVELOP2 funded projects. Like, how would you encourage a space for shared learning on partnership building? Or what would you need for this to happen? Or what would you need from your partners or from your funders or higher education institutions to support your more equitable engagements? Who would like to start? What about our online participants? Maybe Sunil, would you like to start? Or maybe Maria, if you would like to take over while Sunil comes back.
I think that if this is going to work, well, I will continue on the administrative part, but I think that there needs to be more of a dialogue across the practicalities of doing research in the global south. At least it's not so common, at least at my university, at a business school, to go and do ethnographic research, and it's even becoming much more difficult with the ethical guidelines and committees to do even ethnographic work. So a lot of people are shying away from it, and I think it's really important to engage and work with people in the global south. So what we need is an open space pushing for more insights on what are the values, and what are what are the gains for doing this kind of research, and how should it be done practically? Then that is a discussion that must happen on a national level between funders and the universities. Because I have to say that it feels also on a personal level a little bit squeezed in between all of these expectations that are there, plus all the demands on meeting the demands that come from somewhere completely else on publishing high impact publications in business journals that wouldn't care at all about what happens in different places. So that is a challenge, to navigate all of these different expectations, and without much understanding also in the context where one is working.
Thank you, Maria. Laura.
Sorry, just really, quickly. I think that to promote all of the things we've talked about today, I think that research visits are really important. And my project began with meeting a person. I was on a research visit to Uppsala. She was from Uganda on a research visit to Uppsala, and I gave a talk about my interests and with the LGBTQI, and she came in and talked to me, and we struck up a conversation that continued when I invited her on a research visit to Jyväskylä, and together with her, I came up with the project ideas, and unfortunately, because she felt that she would be in a too visible role in Uganda, she couldn't be or paid a salaried research researcher, which I wanted her to be, but she couldn't, and she had to withdraw. But without those conversations that were just kind of informal, just because we happened to be in the same place at the same time, those were really important. And it was also really important because she didn't have the same stance as I did on LGBTQI. She felt that those people are dangerous and it's not good. But she realized that she didn't know anything about them. And actually many African researchers said that to me in Uppsala, because I wasn't aware that I was going to be talking to an African audience when I talked to them. And my talk was really hard for some of them. This was like a year and a half ago. And so, but she came and she said, we need to learn more. We in Sub-Saharan Africa, we need to know more about these people because we're afraid of them, but we don't know anything about them. And so then she and I, just this curiosity. So you don't even have to have the same opinion as someone. You can be on different sides of the fence, but the intellectual curiosity can kind of unite people. And that's exactly what happened here. And so I feel that we need to have these opportunities to meet people from the global south, because just giving an email, it can work. It's worked for me before. I've found people online and things like that. But sometimes the best ideas just come when you start having a conversation with someone,
Yeah, I fully agree, and it has to be the start. It has to be this. But I also see a huge change in like 10 years, because now we have these Zoom possibilities that we can just spontaneously take contact. I mean, it was not possible before. The connections were horrible. So now we can just like spontaneously decide, okay, tomorrow we discuss, and then suddenly we have all these faces from Africa. It's so wonderful. So there are bad. I mean, this is a good change, and then this bureaucracy is to the other direction. So there are like trends to different directions going on. Yeah.
So research visits, technology as well is playing our advantage for these visits and communication. Eero, what about you? What do you think?
I perhaps pick up on a bit of same. I'm not sure I understood the question fully, but kind of just which is otherwise I think it's very important. Just this position of not knowing, which was also mentioned by some previous comments, and so kind of a humility, and which of course is quite natural for us as researchers, but kind of try to put oneself in that position and use that kind of to attain this aim.
So enhancing soft skills, for example, diversity, literacy is important as well. What about you, Sunil? Now you're back. What do you think?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I think some of the things already came into the floor. That I do believe open communication is one of the important part in this context, and that could be resource visit or frequent Zoom meeting, And in that context, I think we can share knowledge, materials, experience, maybe some of the challenges and obstacles between partners. And again, the respecting the diversity of knowledge and skills, that also helps a lot to incentivize the kind of shared learning. And sometimes maybe some of the motivations and incentives for researcher could be like joint publication, future opportunities of like-minded networks. So these kind of things are or should be practiced while having this partnership. And in some cases, maybe respecting the constraint of third world countries, maybe flexibility and creating kind of incentive, that promotes collaboration rather than sort of, punitive measures for some mistakes or some kind of blunders. So this kind of approach could build trust and from
Okay, the
north and
connection.
south, and
The connection is a bit dropping, Sunil. But yes, incentives for partnership building definitely is something very important. Now we'll have our second session of the Q&A. Is there any questions on? Okay. Sunil, are you with us right now? Would you like to finish your comment?
Yeah, okay. I was almost done, so okay, let it be.
Thank you, Sunil. Are there any questions online or on site? Yes.
Yeah, thank you to all the panelists. I would like to pick my question from a contribution from Sunil that a lot of times it feels like the researcher has to push this kind of activities for partnerships and takes a lot of personal initiative. What I would like to ask is, are there any specific roles that the institutions, like funding bodies like we have today, or universities, other than placing demands, of course, specific activities that they can do to facilitate? Like this kind of meeting, I think, is facilitating this kind of equitable partnerships.
Would anybody else here would like to also answer to that question while Sunil is back?
I really think events like this, just more of them. And sometimes they might have to be online because not everybody can come to Helsinki, frequently. But I really think that as long as we are all discussing things that are of great importance to us, to our research, and also to our careers. So yeah, I think that having these kind of workshops, having these kind of seminars is really, really valuable. And having more of them is, I mean, everybody has so many seminars and training workshops and all these things that you're supposed to. So our schedules are already full, that's for sure. But I think that this is really important. I've learned a lot today, and yeah.
Definitely. Anybody else would like to answer?
Yeah, I can also reflect on that. I think that it was great that in this funding call it was mentioned that we need to build collaborative engagement with Global South partners. So we were kind of forced into thinking through that lens from the beginning. But as I mentioned, I think that should also mean that there is training offered to those that are in charge of channeling these funds onwards. That would help greatly. I think it would also help us together. So I don't paint my administrative helpers as the enemies. I think we're both struggling in finding the way. And then at the end, the problem is actually the consequences as felt in the global south. So I would really like to have more training for both the researchers and for the ones that are actually doing the practical work of channeling this towards the south, so that it's not so chaotic at the moment when you have to do it.
Thank you, Maria. And now Sunil is back. Maybe. Okay, no. Then I would actually also like to answer to that question, and it's giving feedback. Sometimes there's even no time to give feedback on the challenges, but also the opportunities that this funding framework sometimes give. Like if funding agencies don't have that feedback, then it's impossible for them to notice. And I think researchers have that key role, have that specific point of view of giving feedback and complaining and raising their voice in different spaces about the issues that they're facing. And having that time and giving that feedback, sparing those 5 minutes of writing an email is important. It's equally important for partnership building. Anybody else would like to contribute or final thoughts for this panel? No, I would like to thank.
Could I mention just one more thing here, just a final one?
Maria.
I think that what we didn't touch upon, but there might be also situations when collaborative partnerships, or that it has to be done in a different way. I think Laura mentioned it in a way that she said that her collaborator maybe wouldn't like to have her name on the paper because it would actually signify something negative for her. So we didn't at all talk about that we as outsiders come in and we can do some research that local researchers cannot do sometimes because of power issues, because of the dangers that they might face if they go into those fields. So I think that it's also very valuable to acknowledge that possibility, as long as it's done in a good way and in a good way that it's enhancing the knowledge. I think Laura gave perfect examples of that.
Very important to highlight, Maria. Thank you so much. I'm not going to sum up every challenge and opportunity in all the conversations here, but I would like another round of applause for the panelists here today. Thank you so much. And with this, we conclude the opening seminar of the DEVELOP2. Thank you so much. And I will pass it to Mikko.
Yes, thank you very much, Kelly. Wonderful panel. Yeah, very good discussion, very constructive discussion in my opinion on responsible partnerships. Clearly, there is need to move from buzzwords to more systematic change, as Eva also brought up. Guidelines, national guidelines and international guidelines, they offer good help in that respect in this process, but goodwill and embracing the idea of sustainable partnership is the basis, as has been also brought up. DEVELOP2 program will continue for the next 3 years. So we will meet again many times. We will offer seminars, annual seminars and more thematic seminars, maybe like this one. We will offer meetings on policy dialogue with the ministry and also hopefully with our parliament. We shall offer training. We are open for ideas on training. We will. Yeah.
And I really would like that to be
there
again.
Will be policy dialogue training number 2
okay, great.
later this year. Yes, but we are waiting for your ideas also, because it's our aim not to organize events where nobody wants to come. Therefore, we want your ideas about great training, great seminars, and so on. Already this spring, we will meet in the Maailma Kylässä event. Our program will participate there. I might need some of your presence also, but I will contact you about that and about other program this year a bit later. Now I would like to advertise another seminar. Here is some information about that. It is the Sustainability Research Innovation Congress in Helsinki in June. So you should check this one. It might be interesting for you also. Okay, but more information will come in detail soon. So thank you very much. Our keynote speaker, Eva, all speakers, panel members, Kelly for the very good panel discussion, all participants on sites and online. Thank you very much. Technical staff, thank you. And the seminar is closed now, and it's time to have some refreshments in the lobby. Thank you.